Welcome to Haltech Elite NSP Training Part 68. This training tutorial, we're going to take a look at programming open loop style boost control. Now, open loop boost control is the most simplistic way that we can work within the boost control tuning. This allows us to just input a basic duty cycle and get some type of a response in our boost. We should see the boost rise as we raise our duty cycle. There's all kinds of strategies and tips and tricks within the boost control just for open loops, and we're going to cover all of that here in this training module. Without further wait, let's jump in so we can check this out.
Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at setting up our open loop boost control using our Haltech Elite within our NSP software. Now, our open loop boost control is the most simplistic way to control boost using our Haltech system on our turbocharged engine. We'll find that we can use a 3 or a 4-port boost solenoid, and we'll be able to turn up our boost pressure past our wastegate actuator if we have an internal wastegate or a external wastegate, whatever that spring pressure is going to be. So it might be 5 pounds of boost as our base, might be 10, 15, 20 pounds of boost as our base spring pressure. That's the lowest boost that we can run within our turbo system. The boost control solenoid will allow us to turn the boost up past that point. It's always important to keep in mind. Now, some general guidelines here I want to talk about real quick is with your wastegate actuator or external wastegate, it's going to be that actuator rated pressure or your spring pressure in your gate. You can typically, on an internal wastegate, double your actuator pressure. So if your base actuator, if you have no boost control hooked up and you have just your pressure source going to your actuator, if you build 10 pounds of boost, let's say you have a 10-pound actuator, you can typically double that boost pressure with a boost control solenoid and hit 20 pounds of boost. If you want to hit more boost than that, you're going to have a higher base actuator spring. You might need to put a 15 or a 20-pound base actuator spring and change that factory actuator or the turbo actuator out to something higher to be able to achieve a higher range of boost control. Now, when we're dealing with an external wastegate, we typically can get about 3 to 4 times the rated spring pressure out of our gate using a boost control solenoid. So for example, if I have a 5-pound spring, I'm most likely going to be able to see about 15 to 20 psi boost from that 5 psi spring using the boost control solenoid to increase the boost pressure. Always very important to keep that in mind. Now, we can't ever turn down the boost pressure. We can only turn it up past that spring pressure. So it's always something to consider when we want to go in and start to turn up our boost pressure using the boost control. A couple other things to keep in mind is if you have dual wastegates on your turbo setup, each wastegate has to have the same spring pressure installed in the gate. So if one wastegate has a 10-pound spring, the other needs to have the exact same 10-pound spring. If you have mixed match springs between 2 wastegates in the system, that can create all kinds of problems trying to control boost. You don't want to do that. Make sure that both wastegates have the same base spring pressure gate spring in them. Okay, those are some of the basics to kind of get out of the way. Now, some other things to keep in mind. The routing of the boost control solenoid when we want to turn up our boost pressure and control boost through the Haltech needs to be correct based on the application that we're dealing with. So if we have an internal wastegate, we're going to find that if we're using a 3-port solenoid, that's the most common we're going to find work with, we're going to have ports 1, 2, and 3 on the solenoid. Now, when we're dealing with an internal wastegate, port 3 will go to your pressure reference, typically from your compressor cover on the turbo. Port 2 will go to the wastegate actuator. And in this state, it's a normally open routing where port 1 is going to be closed and all of the pressure is going to go from port 3 into port 2, and it's going to essentially act as a pass-through when the solenoid's not energized. Now, if we start to energize the solenoid with duty cycle output from the Haltech, 0 to 100% is what we can control that solenoid, that'll start to have some flow bypass not coming from our pressure source of 3, it'll come from 3, it'll actually vent out of port 1 and still apply itself to port 2, again, depending on the duty cycle. Lower duty cycle will have less pressure bypass. Higher duty cycle will have more pressure bypass. That'll act as a way that we increase the boost pressure. We do it in a controlled manner. We're cutting off the pressure reference to the internal wastegate assembly, which will allow us to increase the boost. So we can see how it's going to work in the routing for a typical internal wastegate with a 3-port solenoid. Now, if we're talking about an external wastegate, this is going to be a little bit different. The solenoid itself, we have again port 1, 2, and 3. Port 1 will be our pressure reference. That's going to go to your compressor cover typically. It can go to intake manifold or charge pipe, but compressor cover is the cleanest, easiest option. And then we'll find that we have our port 3, that's going to be vented to atmosphere. And then port 2 is going to go to the top port on the wastegate. Now port 1, which is our pressure reference, also has to tee in to the lower or side port on the wastegate. That has to be connected in order for the wastegate to work and the valve to open and close along with that rated spring pressure. Now, the way this configuration is going to be, the solenoid's in a normally closed state. So when we don't energize the solenoid, we have no pressure that's flowing through our port 1 into port 2. But as we energize it, and as we command duty cycle from 0 to 100%, 0 meaning that we're not energizing the solenoid, 100% meaning we're energizing the solenoid, we'll find that as we progressively give it more duty cycle, we're allowing more pressure to come through that solenoid from our pressure source going to the top port of the wastegate. That's going to push down that wastegate valve more and allow more and more pressure and flow to go through the turbine housing and not through the wastegate itself and bypass that turbine housing. So effectively, whatever type of boost control we're going to be using here, internal or external wastegate control.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.